Hello and welcome back to a brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all doing well. Thank you, as always, for being here. It's great to have you along for a bit of F1 chat and discussion, and I hope the summer break is treating you well. It's going to be a few more weeks until we see our beloved V6 turbocharged hybrid supercars doing the business on a week-by-week basis on most weekends, of course, when we'll be going back to Zandvoort, I believe, for the Dutch Grand Prix. So a bit more familiarity, I suppose is the right word. If you are a Max Verstappen fan, you know, you might miss the feeling of winning, but don't worry, I'm sure that's only going to be a few weeks away. But in the meantime, there is still plenty of stuff to talk about in the F1 world. One topic of discussion that I was very hesitant to talk about during the Belgian Grand Prix review, and that was what on earth is going on at Alpine. Now, for those of you that are familiar to this story and will be familiar with what Alpine and Renault have been trying to accomplish ever since Renault came back into the sport in 2015, this may not seem like a news story, but in the manner of where news broke over this person being moved and that person being moved and an overhaul of its technical structure to levels which we may not have seen before in F1, which is quite worrying, it's definitely something that we need to be talking about. And I couldn't think of anybody better to sit down and discuss this with me in more depth to find out what on earth is going on at Alpine right now than Sam Cooper from Planet F1. Sam, first of all, thanks for coming back on the show again. Always great to have you. How are you, mate?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm all good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for asking. It's been a busy period for you. Obviously, I'd imagine you were looking forward to having a little bit of a mini break, but then, of course, that huge bombshell news coming out on Friday after FP1 regarding Otmar Szafnauer leaving as team principal, and of course, Alain Permane as well, being there for 34 years at Enstone, leaving the sporting director's role, shocked absolutely everybody. It's almost as if Alpine doing what Alpine does best, but on another level.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually at Spa, so I was there when the news sort of broke really, and there was a rumor going around like early morning that someone was kicking off. Like soon it came out that Otmar was on the chopping block really, and like we were all just sort of waiting because you don't want to be the first guy through the door really, because you'll get, if it's wrong, you'll be the one that gets blamed and forever blacklisted. So everyone was just sort of waiting, and then I think L'Equipe were the first people who finally put it out like to the public really, and like just timing wise, I think we were talking about this earlier, but like it's just so bizarre why they chose to do it. Like the fact they did it on a Friday, and just to make people more aware, like the way a Grand Prix works is like you have the drivers will talk on the first day, you'll have FP1, and then on Friday you'll have like a bosses press conference. So like you get a selection of team bosses like Christian Wolf, Christian Horner, Toto Wolff, all those kind of people. They'll chat, and it just so happened that very day Bruno Ferri was scheduled to talk. And if people don't know who he is, he was he's worked for Alpine / Renault quite a long time, but his most recent role change was to VP of Motorsport. So when they silently moved Laurent Rossi out of the picture, like this was a man that came in for him. But now he's been promoted even more, like he's promoted up again into interim team principal. So he sat down to do the press conference, and then 2 minutes before that, Alpine make it official. So of course, like Christian Horner was in this press conference, but I think he got about one question, which is completely never happens in F1, obviously. Like all the questions to Bruno about why have you done it? Why have you done it? Kind of thing. And like his answers were very like straight back, saying, oh, it's just time to accelerate the project and stuff like that. All very like businessy, jargony words that don't really mean a lot. So yeah, but the fact that they did it just before the last race, before the summer break, makes zero sense. But also the fact that Otmar had to stay on and continue in his job role for like the next 3 days, and like you'd see him walking around the paddock, and it's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever been made redundant, you've got to work your notice period, like you don't care anymore. So yeah, just bizarre decision, especially timing wise. Like we can talk about like the sporting merits of it for sure, but like on like a timing basis, why not wait till like now and do it after the final race of the first part of the season's happened? But yeah, a busy time, not one you're expecting on a Friday, but yeah, especially when most of the conversations about rain. So it was nice to have a bit of a change in the Spa press room.
Yeah, absolutely crazy stuff. And, I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely sympathize with any respecting F1 journalist out there, not, necessarily, not wanting to jump the gun and putting the story out before it was made official. Of course, L'Equipe, as far as they're concerned, when they report on things Renault and Alpine related, it might as well be the truth at this point. And, I completely sympathize. You're busy writing up your reports from free practice one. Of course, it was a sprint weekend as well, so there was a lot of emphasis on the main race qualifying. It was going to be happening later that day. And then all of a sudden, this news comes out of the water and completely surprises everybody, even by Alpine standards. And, as you were saying, Sam, for those of you that obviously weren't keeping track of the actual story and how things were developing over the last few weeks, just to kind of summarize everything that has happened at Alpine in the last month or so. First of all, a brand new role, the VP, Vice President of Motorsport, or Vice Principal Motorsport, whatever you want to call it, role was created that, Bruno Ferri was going to be moved into. And he was the engine chief at the time for only 18 months or so, and he had no prior experience of F1 whatsoever before he even came into the role. So that was a surprise. And he was going to be reporting directly to Laurent Rossi, the CEO. Then, only 8 weeks later or so, Laurent Rossi is now moved into a special project leader role. Have no idea what that's going to entail, or even if it's completely relevant to the F1 program. And he's now been replaced by Philippe Krief as the CEO. And then fast forward to the Belgian Grand Prix, Otmar, the team principal, and as I said, sporting director of the team, 34 years experience at Ensto, Alain Permane, one of the most respected and long-standing figures in Formula One, hugely central to Renault's success in the 05 and 06 season where Fernando Alonso was world champion with the team. Their only 2 world titles to date, mind you. They've now been moved on. And also in the same weekend, it was announced that Pat Fry, the chief technical officer, the most senior technical figure at Renault/Alpine, he's now moving to Williams. I think I've got everything covered there, Sam, unless I've missed anyone. But have you ever seen a more extreme technical overhaul of an F1 team before?
Well, I think the only comparison we can make is to McLaren earlier this year, but McLaren's definitely seems like it was done with more intention, really. Like they sat James Key and they broke his role up into 3 different parts, and they've already filled all 3 of those roles, and like it's some quite big names. There's people moving from Ferrari and Red Bull. So that I think that's probably the last time you could say that a technical team was broken up like this. But whereas McLaren's was sort of done with purpose and like, this is why we're doing it, Alpine's doesn't seem like that. It seems to be like, I mean, they're not, it's maybe a bit harsh to say they're making it up as they go along, but that's sort of the impression really. Like at the start of the year, I went to Alpine's car launch and there was big talks of what they're doing for the future. Laurent Rossi talked a lot, Otmar talked a lot, and now 6 months, how many days later, like neither one of those are involved in the F1 operation anymore. And it's just a huge amount of change. And I think one of the most worrying things, if I was an Alpine fan, was when Bruno Ferri was talking, like they said they'd only just started the process of looking for a replacement. And you're thinking, well, if you're deciding to sack someone like this quickly and do it now, usually that means you've got someone lined up. And like whether he was just lying to us, sort of throw us off the scent, that might be another thing. But if it is true that they're in a position now where they're only just starting to look at candidates, like there's little chance he or she's going to be ready for Zandvoort, is it? Like, so Alpine are just going to have this more like uncertainty going into the second half of the season. And it's already been such an up and down season for them on the track. I mean, like how many incidents have both drivers had, like crashing into each other, things like that? Like it's been a very rocky season for them. And I think the last thing they would have needed is this much change at a boardroom level, because we might think the drivers are separate from that, but they're not really. Like it sort of filters down and affects them. So yeah, I think it's going to be a rocky season for Alpine left. I mean, they're P6 currently. Like, can you really say that they're quicker than anyone above them? Not really. So like, yeah, I think it's just a worrying time for Alpine really. And I think they're more likely to go backwards than they are forwards currently.
Yeah, it's absolutely bizarre. And, you mentioned that interview with Bruno Ferri, the new, VP at Motorsport. I'm still not going to get used to seeing that. That's such a random thing in the overall team's hierarchy. But if you want to imagine it, for those of you at home listening to this thinking, well, how am I going to visualize this hierarchy? Well, effectively, you've got Luca Di Maio, the CEO and head of the Renault group. He's basically overseeing the whole thing, or, so he claims. And then below him, you've now got Philippe Krief, which was formerly Laurent Rossi in the CEO role. Then you've got the VP of Motorsport, Bruno Ferri, who is effectively the highest ranking officer that's going to be overseeing the F1 program. So you've already got 2 layers above him that is not going to be involved in the F1 program at all, although there will be some corporate insight from those above anyway. So make of that what you will. And then eventually you've got the team principal role. So you've effectively got 3 layers above the team principal, the person that's supposed to be running the F1 team, making the big decisions on how to make the F1 team going forward. And right now, as you said, Sam, Bruno Ferri also mentioned this as well, that, the team, the bosses need to make up their minds over what this program is going to look like, what the management structure is going to look like, who they're going to be bringing in. And they're doing this after getting rid of their team principal, who was meant to be taking them forward and using the benefit of his experience and bringing a team that had limited resources into the realms of the big leagues, if you like, and someone who has been a huge factor in their success for many years and is arguably one of the most sought after and experienced people working in Formula One right now. Martin Brundle was very glowing in his reference of Alain Permane. I'm pretty certain he'll find work elsewhere very, very easily following the summer break. But just to sort of narrow down on what Bruno Ferri said, for me, I think the one thing that surprised me when I read back the press release afterwards and the interviews, listened to that, he mentioned project like 18 times. And the one question I think many people will have when they hear that is, what is this project supposed to be? Is it the 100 race project to be a winner in Formula One that they keep starting again and again and again? Phase 2 of this project, whatever that means. I mean, at this point, I feel like it's just a naming exercise more than anything else, without an actual plan or structure that's going on here.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think the way he said project, he sort of tied it into. So they had this press release, this press conference a few weeks ago where they were talking about their big projects, but it was mainly focused on their car production. So I feel like they've just sort of taken that part and said, okay, let's apply it to the F1 team. I do still think this 100 race plan is still part of their plan, but I don't know how realistic it is, because I don't know how many. We must be about halfway through it now. I think it started in 2021, so I think they said within 4 seasons they wanted to be challenging for the world title, and I think pretty much every season since then they've gone down. Like, they've got worse. Other people have got better, and it's just looking less and less likely. So yeah, like you said, like, I think if we look at them in comparison to other teams, maybe excluding Ferrari because they're sort of their own case really, but we've got teams like Red Bull where Christian Horner is the CEO and team principal. Like, the buck stops with him. Like, yes, he reports to the Red Bull CEO, but it's on a racing front, it's very much his operation. Same with Mercedes. Toto Wolff is very much the figure of that, and I think that's just a good way to do it, like, where you have one sole person in charge who leads down and like dictates the team. I think McLaren works well. Obviously they've got slightly different, where they've got a CEO and a team principal, but I think they work together as well as a partnership, and that tends to be the way a good Formula One team works, is by having a lead figure who sort of pushes the team forward, gets the ethos of the team and the constructor, and really like is the sole figure in charge. And I think when you start to have so many people involved, like, it's natural that 4 people are going to have slightly different opinions. Like, I think Otmar was talking about that's sort of why it came down to it. It's like the Red Bull bosses wanted success so much quicker than he thought was achievable. And he sort of thought, well, I'm on hiding to nothing really. I might as well mutually agree to leave. So yeah, I think their structure does seem a little bit odd and a little bit out of place in comparison to pretty much every other team on the grid, barring Ferrari, and like that they've got their problems of their own really. So yeah, I think I'm of the opinion that one sole figure who has the final yes or no decision and is someone who's involved in the day-to-day running of the team is sort of the best way to get success.
Yeah, it does seem to be that way. I mean, listening to Bruno Ferri's comments on why these decisions have been taken regarding Otmar Szafnauer and Alain Permane, being moved on. I think in his words, he was saying that there were disagreements over the timeline to reach that level of performance that they were aiming for, and they had a different view on the way of doing it. And for me, I felt that the corporate perspective that is currently overseeing this, the Luca De Meos, the Philippe Kriefs, even the Bruno Ferrans and especially Lauren Rossi, was this stubbornness to stick to this 100 race deadline, or and Bruno Ferri was loosely alluding to 2026. It's almost like they're going to start this 100 race plan again, and yet the view at Enstone on the ground from Szafnauer and Alain Permane was quite the opposite, that this project could be successful, but it's going to take a bit more time than that, or it's going to need to be simplified a little bit more, which is completely the polar opposite of what we're seeing right now. It does feel that that seemed to be the sticking point as to why this decision was made, whether it be in haste or just reactive to the situation that Alpine find themselves in at the moment.
Yeah, and I don't think it's Otmar that should shoulder all that blame. Like weirdly, the same day we had that FIA commission. Sorry, if you can hear an engine roaring outside, I mean someone's clearly Otmar's have enjoying his holiday outside my house.
Yeah.
Um, if we go back to like the Friday, it was the same day that the report of the F1 FIA commission F1 commission came out, and one of the main talking points was this Renault engine, which I think everyone knows is down on power compared to the other three. And there's sort of talk of like, hey, how do we sort of stabilize that really? Like, so if you think about that, like Renault inherently, well, Alpine inherently have got a worse engine. Like they're already starting like a step behind their rivals, and obviously, as we know, they're the only team that run with this engine. So like pretty much every other team on the grid has got a better engine than the Alpine car does. Also, if we sort of factor in just so many like moments of misfortune they've had this year, they had that crash in Australia where both drivers hit each other, complete fluke. We had the crash in, was it Hungary, when Joe essentially just drove straight into the back of Ricciardo, who then managed to hit both of the Alpines. Like they've had some really bad luck moments. Like, and I think that should have probably been taken into account more. Like the fact that they did so well last year, like they really consolidate that P4 position. And obviously it's got a lot harder. McLaren have improved. Aston Martin have really improved since last year. But I just feel like he should have been given more time. But I feel like he's right to say that success isn't a guarantee overnight. And like he was working with quite a bad hand and like in a poor engine. An okay car. It's not one of the slow ones, but it's also not like a super rapid one. And I think he had two good drivers, and he was just I think just needed a bit more time. I think if those little moments of misfortune just went a bit in his favor, so say they didn't crash into each other completely by accident, or Joe hits Ricardo and hits someone else, like it's just these little moments that can be really have such a huge impact, and it's ultimately I think it's cost Otmar his job really.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I liked Otmar Szafnauer. I had a lot of respect for what he had achieved, particularly at Racing Point and Force India, of course. Aston Martin, clearly there was a disagreement, I suppose, on a few things. I don't think it was necessarily patience or timing, but I certainly think that there was an element there where there was a lack of confidence from the corporate level at Lawrence Stroll, and obviously bringing in Martin Whitmarsh and Mike Crack to this day has proved to be rather a good decision from Aston Martin. There's certainly a different scenario there, but at Alpine, upon first sight, it did feel like this was a decision where there was something to go on with this and that there was going to be progress made. I think there were some decisions that were made, particularly with the drivers, that was very, very questionable. But obviously, we know what happened with Fernando Alonso here. He went to Aston Martin. Whether or not he was driven away by Alpine over their current structure or Fernando lost faith, you can make your own mind up on that. Losing Oscar Piastri was obviously a much bigger blow. And we all know how that all went down and how that surprised everybody. And I think we can all agree, for both drivers at this point in time, they've both made the right decision to move on and move elsewhere, which is obviously not a glowing indictment of what's going on at Alpine at the moment by any stretch of the imagination. But now that Otmar Szafnauer has now been moved on by Alpine, I don't want to say that I don't expect him to find another role within another F1 team anytime soon, but I feel like the credit he may have built up from the successful period that he enjoyed and was overseeing at Force India and Racing Point may have withered away now, and that certain F1 teams that might be looking at a potential team principal or someone in that position for the future may not necessarily be knocking on Otmar Szafnauer's door in the short term. I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I do think that's fair. And I think obviously, I think he's only ever going to come back for a team principal role. And you look up and down the grid, like, where's he going to go, really? That's not an obvious option, really. Like, I think the one he's been linked to the most is Andretti. Like, if they get on the grid, like, he's got those American roots. Apparently, he's good, but he's got a good relationship with the Andretti family. So I think that seems like the most likely one. And even that is very much dependent on whether Andretti get on the grid, which, as of right now, we have no idea, like, how close they are, if they might do it. So, I don't think there's an obvious route back into him for him, and I think he's said that he's got in this part of his leaving contract, he has to wait at least a year to join another team. So maybe the situation would have been changed by then. Like who knows what will happen in a year? But yeah, I think for now at least, I'll just enjoy the presumably very large severance package that he was handed, and I'd go enjoy my life on a beach somewhere if I was him.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? And I think it's a really good point. I think because in addition to, or in conjunction with what I was saying just before, the issue isn't necessarily a skill issue or capability of being able to do the job. I think Otmar Szafnauer has proven that he is more than capable of being an effective team principal in the right working environment. To his credit, I wouldn't say that those existed at Aston Martin and Alpine. Not to say that those aren't going to be successful. I mean, Aston Martin is certainly much more likely to be successful at the moment than Alpine, but you do need the right person in the right place. And ultimately, with someone like Mike Crack, I think Aston Martin have found that, at least in the short term. With Alpine, we'll just have to wait and see who they bring in next and how that goes. We'll have to wait and see. But it's more down to the fact that there just aren't enough F1 teams at the moment. And if you're going to get more F1 teams with the right connections, maybe the right working environment will manifest itself at Andretti/Cadillac if they get onto the grid in 2025 or 26, whenever they're planning to come. So we'll have to wait and see. But I'm with you on this one, Sam. I think Otmar should just put his feet up, enjoy the rest of the F1 season, and wait and see how things work out. There obviously will be opportunities, but it's certainly not the last that we've heard from Otmar Szafnauer at the very least. I did want to move the conversation on to something that you touched on already about the ideal perfect structure of an F1 team to be successful. You've mentioned Mercedes and Red Bull as the prime examples, the two teams that have dominated Formula One for the last decade and a half now. And Alain Prost, the four-time world champion, one of the greatest of all time, shared that opinion as well. Although, in fairness to Alain, he didn't exactly put it in the same glowing terms as you have. For example, he was very critical of Alpine, especially in the wake of his departure in 2021. He very much cited his frustrations towards Laurent Rossi, which won't surprise many people that had followed this story with Alain Prost following his role as an advisor. When he left in the wake of that, he was very critical of Laurent Rossi, very scathing in his review of him. I think I found a quote from an interview he did with L'Equipe on him that I might have to quote just to get your reaction. But Alain was very brutal with his assessment of Laurent Rossi, referring to him as an inept manager who thinks he can overcome his incompetence with his arrogance and lack of humanity towards his people. Now, I try to be as objective as I can be on this show. I don't have to because I'm a podcast. I'm not a journalist like yourself, Sam, who has to actually be objective in their job. But on a human level and as an F1 fan level, after what Laurent Rossi said about his Alpine team members in Miami, does a quote like that from Alain Prost surprise you in terms of his assessment of Laurent Rossi, his character?
Oh God, no! Like, I think everyone knows that Alain Prost does not get on with Laurent Rossi, and I think the speed of this story that came out, like, I think it came out Friday evening, so the day of all these announcements, like, that really showed that Alain Prost was just waiting in the wings, like the bullets in the chamber. He's just waiting to fire as soon as something embarrassing Alpine happens. Like, yeah, I'm sort of with Prost on this. Like, I don't think Rossi's been a good leader. Like, how many other leaders do you see going into the press and just slagging off their own team? Like, can you imagine if someone like Christian Horner and Toto Wolff did that? Like that, it seems like incomprehensible that a team boss would go and just destroy his own team principal in the press and think that's fine. And it's not the only occasion of Laurent Rossi that we've seen do that. Like, he's seen like a man who's quite maybe like short-tempered or childish, like just the way he reacts to things. Like, he never seems to see the bigger picture, never seems to think, okay, this isn't going to help the team. And like, also, he never really seems to shoulder much of the blame. Like, he's as much to blame as Otmar ever was. Like, he's the one sort of leading the charge, as you like. And like, I think a big part of why team principals and team bosses are so successful is their ability to accept mistakes and like their ability to sort of take the blame for the team and like make it seem like a real cohesive unit. And I think Laurent Rossi did the exact opposite of that. He sort of tried to break everyone off into parts. So he had a big fight with Alain Prost. So like, it became him v Alain Prost. And then later it became him v Otmar. And it had a bit of him v Alonso last year and a bit him v Piastri, really. Like, he seems to be a person that's really set on making enemies. And like, that's not going to work in an F1 team. Like, let alone if you make enemies of the other teams on the grid. Like, that's fine, do what you want, but like, you're making enemies of people within your own organization, and that's just not a good way to run a team at all. Like, not even a team, like a business, like in the like I was gonna say the real world out there. Like, I think it's just bizarre, and I think it's his. If I had to pick one of the two sackings that was more deserved, I mean, so I say sacking, I know he's just been moved to a different department, but it's essentially a sacking in all but name. But I think his is far more deserved than Otmar's ever was. Like, I think Laurent Rossi was just not fit for that role, really. And I think everything that Alain Prost, I think everyone's universally agreed that seems absolutely fair enough. I think no one said that's out of order. I think everyone's just sort of believed what Alain said. Like, that's his experience, and I think it's one we can all sort of see and predict that Laurent Rossi would be like behind closed doors.
Yeah, I can't help but feel that, now that we know what we know, that this was a decision that perhaps was very much influenced by shareholders at the Alpine and Renault group. Because when Laurent Rossi made the criticism that he made of his own team in such a manner at Miami, um, that would have sent stock prices falling for out and share values and all that boring finance stuff that I'm sure many of you F1 fans probably don't want me to go on about, but it does have an impact. And part of me almost feels that maybe that's why he has been moved into this special projects role, whatever that's going to be, which seems to have very little to no say in how the F1 team is going to be run going forward. So it seems like he's been moved aside. And it's like, okay, you're just going to be doing that. Whatever it is that you're going to be doing, we're going to keep you out of the media pen. We're going to keep you away from all the cameras and the microphones, and you're not going to have any say in the F1 team. And it's just going to be moved on elsewhere. And for me, I also feel that right now Alpine are in this ongoing cycle where the perspective from the corporate level is overshadowing and overhauling the minds of people that work in F1 that know better, that should be making these decisions. And it's just detrimental to the team. I mean, we go back over the last 5-6 years, Sam, and Alpine have been very stagnant in this midfield group. They've finished between 4th and 6th in all of those years. I think P4 in 2018 and 2022. Those seasons they peaked and they did very, very well. And the question was always going to be, can Alpine now, or Renault in this case at the time, can they break into the elite group in F1 with Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull? Can they finally reach that top brass and challenge for the big honours? And every single year, for the same reasons, whether it's been lack of investment, lack of resource, lack of plan, lack of the right people, even lack of elite talent in their drivers, for me, it's always seemed like a team that's been destined to fail, not necessarily because they don't have the right ingredients, but they just don't seem to know what to do if they have any of those components at all, let alone the situation they're in right now. With all due respect to their current situation, they don't seem to have any of it.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much joined up thinking, really, like between a lot of the groups. And like, you start to wonder, like, is this a doomed working place? Like, if you did take someone like Toto Wolff and put them in that team, is he going to be able to get success from it? Or is it so mismanaged that regardless of how good the team principal is, like, they're not going to get a result of it? Like, I think you're right. Like, they need to have like a really good not shake over the board, but sort of just get on the same page and have a clear plan and one that's realistic, and then back that plan up. I think one of the big criticisms as well as Renault is like they haven't really put their money where their mouth is. Like, it's an expensive sport, and like Alpine aren't known as one of the big spenders, so like you can't expect to challenge Red Bull and Mercedes without putting that kind of money in. And like, just look at Aston Martin, for example. They spend like so much money on that factory to even have a chance of getting near the podium. Like, they've poured a lot of money into their project, like hired a lot of good staff, like made a lot of smart moves, and that's sort of paying its dividends. But even that's not a guaranteed way to win the title. Like, it's really competitive, and I just think Renault haven't really done that. Like, they haven't put their hand in their pocket and sort of said, okay, we're going for it. Like, they've said it, but they haven't like physically done it. Like, haven't backed it up. So yeah, I just think it's a structure that's not working currently, and I think they just need to get on the same page. And like, you can have disagreements, but keep them out of the press. Like, that's just not a way to run your business, really.
No, I mean, and we can talk about, the corporate level trying to interfere with the F1 team level, and it becomes a huge mess because we know one side is always going to be dominant, and more often than not, it's usually the corporate level. Unfortunately, the level that might know how to make money, but they don't know how to make a good Formula One team or how to win things. That has to be left to the people that on the ground that actually know what they're talking about. And very rarely does this happen where the F1 side supersedes the corporate side. And it's a shame because the two don't even have to work in tandem with each other. They just need to be aware that even if they're kept separate, one sticks to what they know, the other one sticks to what they know, and then you can be successful. And sometimes you do need someone that fits in both camps, like a Toto Wolff or a Christian Horner, to oversee this whole program and make it work and make everybody a lot of money and very, very successful in Formula One. It can happen. That's what's been happening in the last decade and a half. And Alain Prost cited this especially. He said that, he used Mercedes and Red Bull as examples. You had Toto Wolff, you have Christian Horner, you have some brilliant men and women all throughout those teams doing a wonderful thing. It's a very streamlined, simplified process. And at the helm of it, it's backing and building around an elite driver like a Sir Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen in those teams, and Sebastian Vettel before that, of course. And when you have those examples, for me, I just find it baffling. Even a team like Ferrari, you can compare this as well in the Alpine camp, but to a lesser extreme in that regard, because they do invest and they do try to win. Whereas Alpine, I'm not even sure what they're trying to do here. I'm still convinced they're using this F1 project to try and build a car brand rather than an F1 team or a successful one. And Renault's just going along with this for as long as it suits them at this point in time. And as I said, it baffles me that not every single F1 team that wants to be successful looks at the model of what Mercedes and Red Bull are and what they have been the last decade and a half and think, at the very basic, this is what the management structure needs to be. And then we'll try and get an elite level driver. I mean, I like Gasly, I like Ocon. They're very, very good. I certainly wouldn't call them elite level drivers at this point in time. So I just don't understand it, Sam. I mean, can you get your head around why every team doesn't try to adopt this structure, if you like?
No, to be honest, we've seen it's a winning formula. I guess some think they're starting from somewhere different, so they're not going to catch up by doing the same methods, and they'll try something different, like having a 100-race plan. But yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. Really, it just seems like such an obvious way to win races, or at least try to be competitive. And it seems like a good way to make an F1 team, and yet for whatever reason, Alpine and, like you said, Ferrari as well don't always follow that rule, that situation.
Yeah, very true. I want to talk briefly about Pat Fry. The most senior technical officer, moving on now, going to Williams. That was announced a little bit earlier in the weekend, and it's a massive coup for Williams. But for me, I think it speaks volumes about the direction Williams are going, and it also speaks volumes about the direction Alpine are going. One of those two teams are moving forward, and it certainly isn't Alpine at the moment. Did that move surprise you when you found out about it, Sam?
Yeah, I suppose it did really. If we look at where the teams are in comparison, really, Alpine have had a good few years. They won a race last year. Yeah, last year it was. So yeah, it sort of seems odd that someone would leave that to move to what was essentially a backmarker. They're doing a bit better this year, but for a long time they've been the team that comes last. But like I said, I think it's quite an exciting time for Williams. I think James Vowles is doing a good job, and I think when we're talking about longer term projects, I think that's probably the longest of them all. Really, is to try and sort of make Williams a competitive force once again. Obviously, getting Pat Fry in is a huge coup, and that's only going to help Williams, and sort of it's just a sign of where they want to be and where they're going, really. And I think it's just a lot of positive signs. And I think we're sort of seeing in F1 that a lot of staff members are sort of not jumping ship, but swapping teams quite a lot. And that's not something we're overly familiar with. So maybe that's good for the sport. And these smart, intelligent, excellent people start to get moved around just away from the big teams a lot. So yeah, I think you're right in saying that it's really good news for Williams, and it's just more not great news for Alpine. I think James Vowles, he spoke to the press on Friday, and he made it clear that this wasn't related to the other goings on at Alpine. This was always in the works, kind of thing. It just so happened that it fell on the same day that they could announce it. So yeah, good move for Williams, and Alpine now have a lot of jobs they need to hire for quickly.
Yeah, and Alpine further went on to say that they weren't really expecting any further future departures, or any further departures, if you like, elsewhere in the team. I certainly don't believe that. I think this is certainly not the last of it. As I said, this restructure I've never seen anything like it before. It's absolutely crazy. I know we mentioned McLaren earlier, but for me, I can understand that was more like not necessarily reshuffling. It was like a redesign, but poaching and picking key figures that have been let go elsewhere or brought in from other big teams to try and build this structure and improve it going forward, rather than just firing and not even know who you're going to replace it with, or just putting people like square pegs into round holes, or having more layers in this hierarchy than you need just for the sake of doing it. So, it's good to see. It's good to see from Williams' perspective that they have brought in someone like Pat Fry, and it speaks volumes considering where they were last year. This was a team that was very much the slowest team on the grid. They were really struggling, and fast forward a year, okay, they're probably not going to catch Alpine in the Constructors' Championship. There is still a gap there, but they're a lot closer to Alpine than they were last season. And you could very easily see a scenario in a year's time where Williams have got past Alpine, and Alpine are still wondering, how much further they're going to fall back, and Williams are on the rise right now. So it's great stuff to see. I think on a smaller level, we talked about some of the bigger teams and their ideal structures in place. I can't help but feel as well that the success of Aston Martin over the last 12 months and what they've had to do to get there in the winter, and McLaren's success in season on development and where they seem to be going, two teams that were very much fighting Alpine and have now leapfrogged them into this league group. For me, I feel that that's had a huge influence on this huge change at Alpine.
Yeah, I think everyone's sort of after their own McLaren or Aston Martin moment, really. I think it's not just Alpine. I think Mercedes have talked about how they'd like to have quite a significant boost in upgrades, really. I think they've sort of set the bar of how much you can improve in a year. Obviously, they're not as quick as Red Bull, but Red Bull started from a very high up position. And I think, yeah, you're right that they'll be Alpine will be looking at McLaren and Aston Martin very enviously of what they've achieved in these last 6 months, because I think both of them are on course to finish higher than they did last year. I think definitely Aston Martin. I think McLaren finished sixth last year, so obviously if they get fifth, that's one better. Whereas Alpine are on the other way down. And I think, like I mentioned, I went to that Alpine launch, and their big goal was to consolidate P4 and sort of maybe start challenging the top three. And they've just done the exact opposite. They've gone down the leaderboard, really, and now they've sort of got one eye over their shoulder, really, rather than looking ahead. So yeah, just not a good time, really. I think the more we talk about the Alpine, the more we sort of realize how dire this situation is, really.
Well, I mean, we're aware of this. I'm not sure if they're aware of this. They're trying to put a spin on it that, everything's under control. It depends on who you ask, really, because, Bruno Faman, and we've had a lot of quotes from him on this. And for me, it doesn't inspire confidence that you've got your new VP of Motorsport in there. A questionable decision given his experience, but I'm sure he's qualified to do the role that Alpine have put him into. I certainly hope he is. But the reference that he's given of what is going on with this structure and what the plan is going forward, even though he kept calling it a project over and over and over again, or phase two, whatever this is supposed to mean, for me, it just didn't inspire any confidence at all. It felt very, I always want to say you want to be proactive rather than reactive, but it almost feels like they're very reactive to what Aston Martin and McLaren have done, and seem to think that it is realistic that they can suddenly become a top team in 6 months or even 12 months, when the reality is Aston Martin and McLaren acknowledged their issues at an early point and were very patient. They could have easily made these wholesale changes. Someone like Lawrence Stroll is not afraid to get rid of someone when he feels they're not quite cutting it. McLaren made some big changes, promoting Andrea Stella after Andreas Seidel went over to Alfa Romeo/Audi to, embark on that journey. A lot was changing at those teams, but they had the vision, they had the patience, and they allocated the resource. They took the pain in the short term. Aston Martin last season, McLaren in the early part of this season, and now they are enjoying the benefits of that patience and the efforts they've put in. And for me, Alpine can react to this and do what they've done right now, but I would not be surprised, Sam, if you and I are here in a year's time or even 6 months' time after the season is finished, talking about more changes at Alpine. The one issue they seem to lack is patience. They talk about 100 races, and that's fine if you want to have a deadline. But if you're not going to be patient to see this process through from start to finish, then I don't even know what you're doing, because you're just wasting everybody's time and money.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Really, there's not much more I can add. They're sort of a team without direction at the moment. And they sort of need to find that quickly, because F1's a very competitive sport, and you soon find yourself going backwards if you don't start making improvements. So, yeah, I think just fully agree with what you said, really.
And that's why you're the journalist, because it's took you 15 seconds to say what I had 4 minutes. So
It's much easier to say I agree.
yeah, I come from a
Yeah.
place of passion. Maybe it's because I hold some element of alignment to this as a Ferrari fan, but I mean, it's not as dire as that, so I've got to count my lucky chickens, without worrying about that too much. In terms of potential replacements, of course, Alpine at this point in time, according to Bruno Ferri, are drawing up a list of candidates, and that they've got to decide who they're going to want in. One person in particular that has been linked to this team principal role for some time is Mattia Binotto, the former Ferrari boss. Now, I am happy to sit back and add my comments after you, Sam, on this one. But what do you think? First of all, is Mattia Binotto the right fit for Alpine? And if he is, would he want to take the job on?
Well, he's got experience at dealing with chaos, hasn't he, when he worked at Ferrari? So he's sort of got that situation underhand. Obviously, there's one obvious point to talk about is the fact that I believe he's on gardening leave until next year. So, like, if Alpine do want him, they're going to have to wait at least half a year, which means Bruno Ferri will be in charge for 11 or 12 races. So, yeah, we'll see how that takes place. But, yeah, I think that's probably the best that they could get, really. Like, who else is going to have that high-level experience, that much experience in Formula One, especially in an operation like Ferrari, which is sort of what Alpine want to be. Maybe not the modern-day Ferrari, but, like, obviously the winning Ferrari of yesteryear. Like, that's sort of what Alpine are aiming for. So maybe Binotto is the perfect person to do that. Like, yes, his Ferrari... I mean, you can look at his Ferrari time in two ways, really. Like, some people will say it's a disappointment, but I think it's also fair to say, like, it was quite a big success. He sort of oversaw them through that awful period where the car was just dreadful, got them back to at least winning races. Like, that was a big thing that hadn't happened for a while, and he did that. And, like, fair enough, he paid the price for ultimately the team's failures in the end, and I think that's sort of the natural end to a team principal's role. But yeah, I think he'd be a great option. It's whether Alpine want to wait for that long to get him in, and again, it's whether they give him the time and the ability to work the project ready and give him the space rather than interfering. Like, that's always going to be, I think, more important than whoever's in charge. Is sort of how do the board and how do the various levels of management we've got now, how do they deal with the team principal and sort of let him get on with his own thing, really? And I think that's always going to be more important. But yeah, I think they could do a lot worse than Binotto, is what I'll say.
Yeah, I think that'd be a fantastic appointment, a real statement signing, because as a Ferrari fan, I was a little bit skeptical about the decision to replace Mattia Binotto. However, that being said, I think we'd gotten to a point where Ferrari seemed to have made their mind up. Binotto is obviously a very difficult decision to make, and Ferrari have gone and made that, brought in someone like Fred Vasseur. I think we're going to have to wait a while before we start to see if that was actually the right decision or not. At this point in time, I think Ferrari's issues are much deeper than just bringing in a new team principal. I think F1 usually is a bit deeper than other sports where they expect a new manager bounce. You just don't really get that in Formula One. You can't just turn up and the car is like 10% faster than it was just because you have a new team principal at the helm or anything like that. So, make of that what you will. My concern, though, Sam, even though I think Mattia Binotto would be the ideal candidate that Alpine would probably want on their shortlist to step into this role, I just find it hard to see a scenario where Mattia Binotto is going to be convinced to want to join this Alpine team because of the fact that the lack of patience that they have. I mean, look, over the last 18 months, we could go through the list of names like Martin Bugowski, Davide Brivio, Fernando Alonso, Piastri, Szafnauer, Alain Permane, so many different figures that have been moved on in such a short space of time. And that's not even including the people that are still at the team that have moved on to other roles elsewhere. There's no consistency. There's no long-term planning there. And on top of all of that, we talked about this hierarchy structure earlier on. If Mattia Binotto was to take on that team principal role at Alpine, he would have 3 layers of command above him that would be making decisions on the F1 team that he should be making. We talk Luca Di Maio, Philip Creef, Bruno Ferri, the new VP at Motorsport. And that's not including what input Lauren Rossi may have on the sidelines now. We don't know that yet, but I'm sure he may have a few things to say on at ground level that the media aren't privy to at the time. So I just can't see a scenario where Mattia Binotto, who left Ferrari, all right, he was removed, but in part, he wasn't happy about the fact that he couldn't report anymore to, to Louis Camilleri, who he was very good friends with and before he fell ill. And then afterwards, he had a structure where he had to report to John Elkann, and then underneath him, Benedetta Vigna, who obviously there was a bit of a sour relationship there as well, because Vigna didn't rate Binotto that highly, or didn't, feel he had control of that team. So I just can't see a scenario where Binotto goes from Ferrari and to a team that has got an extra layer or two of control over him, making the decisions that he should be making as the F1 team boss.
Yeah, I think that's a completely fair point. And sort of go back to what I say, really, like like I said, the biggest problem is the board. It's not whoever's the last person in charge, like whoever's the face of it. Like there needs to be some serious changes in there. And whether Binotto will enjoy not having as much responsibility, maybe on that side of things, maybe that'll work a bit better with sort of his background. But when he's being overruled by someone who's 3 levels above him, then that's not going to help him. Like he's not going to be able to get his ideas across, and ultimately he'll be a failure if that's what happens. So like I said previously, it's much more important, I think, how the upper management sort of act and behave from this point on than it is whoever happens to be in the team principal chair.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think above all else, I think this further vindicates that not only was Oscar Piastri an absolute genius for doing what he did, it was just over a year ago when he shocked the F1 world with that very infamous tweet about Alpine prematurely promoting him into a role that he was not going to be taking on and going to McLaren. But it also confirms that for once, Fernando Alonso was able to leave a team that he considered to be in distress and actually go to pastures new that were much better than where he left. So you got to give him credit on that regard.
Yeah, it's got to be worrying for Alpine when Alonso's leaving you. It's like, oh God,
and he's gone somewhere better.
Yeah, it's happened. If he thinks we're the worst option, good God. But even it's nice that Alonso's having his moment in the sun and not spending his last few years in F1 in this Alpine situation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he said much. I don't know if you picked up on any press pieces or spoke to Fernando at Spa. I had heard he was quite vocal about Otmar Szafnauer, saying that he just keeps going on and on and on about this business with myself and Piastri from 2022. He's just got to stop talking. But, I mean, that's Fernando for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't hear that, but I sort of agree with him. I think especially Piastri, I think they've been quite harsh on what they've said. And Piastri is essentially a very young guy who had every right to leave. I think especially from Rossi on that point, I thought that was a bit harsh and a bit out of order. So I'm sure Alonso is very happy, as is Piastri probably, that he chose the right career move for him.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're happy every time they drive past an Alpine. But, fortunately for them at the moment, that's not something they have to worry about too much at this point in time. I think before we round this off, Sam, I think we have to say something that's positive about Alpine going forward at the moment. And that is they've got 2 very good drivers.
Yeah,
I
sprint
hope
podium.
very, very well.
At least they got a sprint podium that sort of overshadowed. Well, not overshadowed, but sort of made their weekend a little bit better. Gasly did really well. I think Gasly's a really good driver. I agree with you. He's not in quite that elite level, but I think he's sort of the next level down, really. And Ocon, I think someone who goes under a lot of radars. He's sort of proved himself very, very capable. Beat Alonso for points last year. Yes, Alonso had about 400 mechanical issues, but he still beat him for points, and he's won a race. So I think they've got a good couple of drivers. They just need to get a car that's at least somewhat competitive and just leave them to it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that one. And I don't think there's really much more to say on those guys. I think you've summed it up absolutely beautifully. But I mean, I think that's all we got time for on this one. We could talk about Alpine's misfortune for days, and I'm sure many of our listeners wouldn't mind that. But I'm sure there are plenty of come guys, you've got to wrap this up now. How much more smack can we talk about Alpine, or how dire can the situation get? We'll have to wait and see. We've still got half a season to go and plenty more topics to discuss during the summer break. But Sam, before we sign off, as always, where can our followers find you on the socials and more of your written pieces online for more great F1 content?
Yeah, so my Twitter is, I say Twitter, or X, whatever it's called these days, is Sam Cooper _. On Instagram, it's Sam Cooper F1, which I have started posting more on. I never used to, but if you want to see me get halfway up a Rouge and get really tired, that's on Instagram. And then, just planetf1.com is sort of where I do all my written stuff.
Have you taken up doing the circuit track runs like Luke Smith does?
Do you know what? I've had 2 for 2 where I've got about a fifth of the way up the track just walking it, and I got told to leave because it's shut. So I got to the very top of Eau Rouge, and then a
Wow.
van came up and said it's closed. And that also happened at Silverstone, where I got like a fifth of the way around the track, and someone told me it's shut. So I've clearly got to go earlier in the day, but I'm just busy working, and they want to
I was
get
just gonna
people
say.
home. Yeah.
Or maybe you've just got to hang out with some of the other journos that are doing the track runs and stuff like, or get a run with Crofty, or go with Luke or someone like that. 'cause
Exactly, yeah. Maybe I'll
it's
see
so
that when they're putting their running shoes on. Maybe I'll take that as my advice to go. But yeah, I always leave way too late in the day, and I just get told to leave. So
Yeah, we'll have to see that at some point this season. You and Luke have a race around the circuit. See how we go.
I think he'll win. I haven't run in a long time.
The guy has been setting personal best and purple sectors everywhere he goes. I'm absolutely loving following that along. So, yeah, you'll have to have a go one time, Sam, if you fancy it. See, just to see how quick Luke really is around the circuit. Or maybe you're faster. Who knows? Maybe that'll be the race of the season.
Yeah, I mean, let's do it Austria, where the track is the shortest. I'll do it. I won't do it in Belgium, where it's 7 kilometers long and up a hill. So I'll wait for Austria next year.
Yeah, probably not a bad idea actually, but guys, enough running talk. I think that's all we've got time for in this one. We will be back, of course, for some more content over the summer break. We've got our mid-season review coming up, and a bit of a special audio-only episode from yours truly about my experience as a fan at Silverstone. I've got some great tips and some ideas for any of you that wants to go to a race in the future. It doesn't have to be Silverstone, but hopefully it will apply to those circuits as well. So keep your ears to the ground for that one coming up soon. But until then, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. As always, please stay safe, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.